I'm Paige, I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, I have absolutely no idea what I want to share about, and I've tried to not overthink this, so I'm just going to see where this takes me. But yeah, I was born in the late 90s in Johannesburg. I was the second child from my mother and father. Yeah, I grew up in a very relaxed home, I guess, in terms of finances and security, but I was always a very distant child emotionally. I was always raised to deal with myself when I was feeling any kind of overwhelming emotions. My parents believed in a lot of what I think people call self-soothing. So from a young age, I kind of developed the mentality of if there's something going on for me, I need to deal with it by myself. And yeah, I grew up, always had everything I needed. I went to all-girls Catholic convent growing up, and when I was in grade 4, my parents got divorced. And at the time, I was a lot younger than my sister, about 4 years younger than my older sister, but she couldn't see that it was something that was good, and I, at the time, could. I had been very, I guess, intuitive about what had been going on from a young age. I never really slept well, so in the middle of the night I'd hear my parents arguing, and I kind of saw that divorce as something being a positive shift for my family. And yeah, my parents both went off the deep end at that time. My dad I didn't see for a good few months. He went deep into his kind of behavior, which was partying after work, and he was MIA for a big chunk of my young life because of that. My mother had her kids very young, so she decided to relive her 20s and her 40s. So my older sister became my best friend and my mother figure, and she did a lot of the things that you do when you kind of grow up. For me, my mother was only ever doing the best that she could, though. She had kids very young, and I believe she didn't ever want kids when she was younger. She had them because she was with my father, who's always wanted a whole soccer team of kids. But yeah, I was the only planned kid out of my dad's 3 kids, which he has today, and I ended up being the most trouble for them for some reason. And a few years into high school, I was struggling, I guess, to fit in with girls. I had never been able to connect with women on any kind of healthy level. I always gravitated more towards the male friends I had grown close to in my time in high school. And then in grade 9, I moved to a co-ed school that was no longer a religious-based school. By that time, I had kind of lost touch with anything to do with religion. And that was all me judging religion for the people it was practiced by. Being in a Catholic school, there were quite strong opinions about certain things, and I was always raised to be very tolerant and open-minded of different sexual orientations, different races, different groups. And that wasn't very tolerated in the school I was in. And when I went to Crawford, it opened up a whole other life for me. For some reason, I thought that I was becoming the person I was always supposed to be. And today I know that that lifestyle that I started living there eventually led me to my rock bottom. So I had started drinking from the age of 12 years old, on and off. Nothing intensive, nothing really alcoholic kind of behavior that I could notice in terms of drinking, but there was definitely a lot of dishonesty and secretiveness around it. And yeah, I used for the first time in school, and I remember I only started smoking because I thought it would cover up the smell of what I was using. Very mad thinking. And through my childhood, I had always gravitated towards being obsessive over one person in periods of my life. And when I kind of let that friendship run its course because I had been so obsessive, I would move on to the next person. And at that time, it was a friend of mine called Ella, and she became a very big part of my life for a good few years. We spent every minute together that we could. I was at her house before and after school, on the weekends, constantly. And that kind of relationship was very toxic because we were always using. We had very easy access to the substance of choice for both of us because her stepfather was also using with us. And I kept this all under wraps. I remember within 3 weeks of using, I ended up on psychiatric medication because my behavior had gotten so out of hand and my emotions were so volatile that my parents didn't really know what else to do. And for my mother, it had worked when she was not okay around the time of the divorce. So they seemed to believe that that would help me. My parents had asked me to go for some kind of psychiatric help for years, and after about a year and a half of using, I reached a point where I didn't really feel okay within myself, and I wanted some kind of solution. So I started seeing a psychologist who I from day one manipulated and lied to, and I guess looking in hindsight, used it as a tool to justify why I was behaving the way I was. And I remember something she told me so clearly: if you're not happy with something, you either need to accept it as it is or change it. And I thought that was mad. But living in recovery today, I know that's my truth. If I can't change something, I have to accept it. And that's really the only thing I've been able to remember from what she taught me. But yeah, I failed a couple of drug tests in that school, and that led to me moving to Hillcrest with my dad. He had relocated, he had had his third child, and he was living with my stepmother. No one wanted me to live with my mother because it had become quite a toxic relationship on my part, because I'd always pushed her away and she didn't really know what I was doing with my life. But what I was doing at that point in my life was abusing a variety of prescription medications as well as substances that were illegal, and I would also drink quite often, really just mixing anything to find something that made me feel numb enough. And moving to Hillcrest, the only reason I went there was because of my stepmother. My father and my stepmother both lost their brothers to addiction, and they wanted to help me. I don't think they ever realized the extent of everything that was going on. And when I moved there, I decided to make the decision to quit smoking, quit drinking, quit everything, and that lasted 2 months. My matric dance came, and in one night I started smoking again, I drank again, and I got high again. And that matric year was quite chaotic for me. There was someone that was in the year that was having an affair with me through the year, and in between all of that, playing him off against his friends, and it was all just madness. But somehow, through all of the chaos and the drinking, because I was given quite a lot of freedom, I was able to go out and drink and do what I wanted to, really, even during finals and prelims. I managed to come first in the grade at the end of the year, and that was all based on resentment. I find it quite powerful for me to see how strong resentment is in that sense, because the only reason I came first in the grade is because I wanted to take it away from someone else who had been first in the grade the whole year. And that woman was the person who was in a long-term relationship with someone that had been having an affair with me that whole year. So I studied my arse off to take something away from her. And that was all just resentment-based. And then I came out of school. My parents wanted me to take a gap year because I burnt myself out in matric, especially around finals. I was quite finished, emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. I was drained. So they suggested I take a gap year, but I was told I have to work if I'm not going to study. And that gap year turned into a gap year and a half of me going through a cycle of working a late shift at whichever restaurant I was working at, because there were many, going out with my friends that I worked with, drinking away most of that money, and then coming home with a little bit left and telling my dad that's my contribution and pretending that was 50% of what I earned, because that was what was expected of me. But I lied about that from day one. By that time I had stopped using, and I was only drinking and taking my medication because I was being drug tested by my parents, because they kind of caught on to the fact that even though I had moved, my behavior wasn't changing, and I had a positive drug test during matric. I spent most of my high school life grounded. I was grounded for my 18th birthday, and the only reason I got the 18th birthday party I did was because I came first in the grade. And I remember for my 18th birthday at the end of the year, having a huge party, and I made it about no one but the person I wanted to be with, and I ended up puking over the balcony, and I don't remember much of it. And my stepmother put a lot of effort into that. Her kind of way of showing love is gifts and things, and that's also something I've had to come to accept. So back to kind of being out of school, I worked in hospitality for a long time, and then eventually I got into studying. I didn't know what I wanted to study. I never put any action into applying for actual universities, even though I had the marks to do what I wanted to do. And I ended up studying makeup for 6 months. And I really love it. I thrived in it, and it's become quite a passion of mine. But in amongst all that, I was getting high before lectures, after lectures, and again, it was work, studying and using, and I spent no time with my family. I've always been incredibly disconnected from them. And yeah, so then I finished my makeup course, and in amongst all of that, it was bouncing from one person to the next and kind of by the time I pissed people off enough that they didn't want to be around me, I had lined up the next group of friends or the next person, and that's been my pattern my whole life. Always choosing someone and then pushing it as far as I could, where I would actually damage people quite negatively, and the majority of the people from my past I cannot even speak to again because I either don't want to or it's the best thing for them and myself and my recovery. Eventually I ended up in a long-term relationship with someone. The only reason I ended up long-term with them was because I wanted to prove a point that I could stay in a long-term relationship, and I took this dishonesty quite far. I ended up living with the person, I had dogs with the person, I took on a job from his boss's, bookkeeping job, which I hated, but it was enough money to keep myself going and not have to go home and not rely on my parents anymore. And that relationship is ultimately what led me to my rock bottom, because I had gotten myself so kind of trapped emotionally because it was incredibly toxic, that I couldn't leave, but I didn't want to stay anymore. And we lived our lives very separately, even though we lived together. And when lockdown came, we had to spend a month solid together, and everything kind of fell apart. It was a very toxic, abusive relationship on both parts, and yeah, it's got to a point where I had gotten into a kind of psychosis from mixing all the things that I did, whether it be illegal or prescription medication, that I had lost touch with reality for so long that I didn't really know what was real and what wasn't. And yeah, so my parents ended up picking me up from his house after really bad arguments. I've gone back to their house once before because of it, and just kind of lied my way out of it, minimized how bad things actually were between us. And I spent 2 days at my parents' house before they realized how not okay I was, and they sat down to have an intervention with me. And I remember my dad trying to point out that I'm the only common denominator in all the chaos in my life, and my stepmother telling me that I'm not a well puppy, her nice way of saying I'm really sick. And that turned into a whole argument because I don't want to look at myself. I wanted to blame. I said some really horrible things, and I remember this is one of my most powerful step one moments. I remember having to pack my bag very quickly because my dad was running around the house after me, telling me to get the fuck out, and packing whatever I could without a mask, taking my bag, walking out, and just before I left, looking at my baby sister, who I had never really been present for or a part of, which is why she's not really prevalent in my story. As much as I cared about her, I never really made any effort to be a part of her life, and I was never a good role model as an older sister. She saw me go in between relationships because I'd always bring the people home, and yeah, she saw a really bad example of what it is to be a big sister, and still today I suffer those consequences. I have spoken to her, I think, maybe 3 or 4 times since I've come into recovery. But I remember walking out the door and stopping and looking and seeing her standing in the pathway, and she's only 8 at this time, standing in the passage and just looking at me, not really knowing what's going on because I was screaming, I was a wreck, my dad was shouting at me, my stepmother was trying to console her, and I looked at her and I walked out. I didn't say anything. So I walked out with the intentions of walking back to my ex's house, and I wasn't allowed back on their property. We were renting, and I caused so much chaos that I wasn't allowed back on their property. Everyone kind of had to lie and manipulate to get me to go anywhere. I had blocked everyone and everything on my phone within a matter of minutes, except my ex, who I still for some reason wanted to go back to, even though it was incredibly toxic. And he fetched me with his best friend, told me we were going somewhere else. I ended up outside my parents' house. And I wouldn't let anyone near me. If anyone came close to me, I would go crazy. I started screaming. I don't remember much of it. I just remember the next day kind of realizing I had quite a few bruises on me because obviously people had to kind of hold me to stop me from just running. And then I ended up in a psych ward that night. In that moment, I realized I kind of had nothing. No one wanted to have anything to do with me. Not my stepmother, my mother, or my father. They didn't want to speak to me even if I reached out. My dad constantly reminded me through this whole process that he's only doing this because he loves me and he wants the best for me. And he's never expressed much of that stuff to me until all of this stuff happened. He's a very guarded person. And I ended up sitting at 3 a.m. outside, by a window in the psych ward. You can't really go outside, and looking at the view and kind of just thinking like, this is it, like something's got to change now. Like I've shut every door in my life. And then it was a week of isolation and another 2 weeks of utter chaos. I manipulated my psychiatrist, I manipulated my psychologist, and I had a psychiatrist and psychologist at the same time, that arrogant to think that I needed both. And I manipulated my way into being so over-medicated that I ended up on ketamine therapy. I had lost touch with reality. I've still got big patches in my memory missing from all of that because a lot of the stuff was all to numb me. And at the end of my stay, I remember I had just finished the last kind of course of the ketamine therapy. I went to go see my psychiatrist and he told me I'm being discharged. And in all my insanity, I didn't think I was ever going to leave there for some reason. I hadn't spoken to my dad in 3 weeks, but I had to phone him and ask him to fetch me, as much as I knew I wasn't really going to be home. And he answered my call, and he said, well, what are you going to do? And at that moment, I realized I had really, really screwed up because I had shut every single door completely in my life. And in my kind of insanity, I took that as a sign that no one really wanted anything. So I remember I finished all the cigarettes I had and made the decision that I was going to try to take my own life. And it was close to succeeding, but through kind of a series of events, the nurses were able to figure out what I was up to. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror and the whole process of that and just not seeing any kind of joy in anything anymore. I was incredibly ill physically and mentally at that time, and I was put onto suicide watch, and the next day Wayne came and fetched me. So my dad fetched me, and then Wayne fetched me from my dad at the COVID testing station, and my journey in treatment started. I was nuts. I remember in isolation I was shouting and screaming on the phone, to the point that the patients in the room near my isolation called the counsellors, and one of the counsellors had to sit me down and say if I don't stop that they're going to take me back to the psych ward. And I thank God for that, because I kind of realized that I needed to just shut up. And I still wasn't okay. I came out of isolation straight into the swing of things in treatment, and treatment was quite a whirlwind. I wouldn't surrender for a long time. The majority of my time in treatment was spent pretending that I had changed, or that I was changing, or that I wanted to let go of everything, but I hold on to a lot. I left certain things out of my first step 5 that I had to get honest with in my second step 5. And yeah, I still struggled a lot to focus on one of the main things in my kind of disease, and that is people, because I struggle to be genuine with people. I struggle to make any form of deep, honest connection, and that showed because I hurt a lot of people. I hurt the friends I had made, the first woman friends I've ever made in my life. I hurt a lot of them. In my behavior, I was incredibly toxic. I hurt my sponsor because I was not being completely honest, and I would blame her for a lot of things. And yeah, one really harsh concern group that I needed brought me to a place where I realized I couldn't go to the halfway house because I wasn't okay, but I also couldn't leave because I had nothing. My parents didn't want to speak to me. The only one that would still speak to me was my mother, and I guess it's because she felt bad, not because she wanted to. And I had just started my second set of steps at that time, and yeah, basically what it came down to is I'd never connected to step 1, 2, and 3. I'd never surrendered. I never accepted the fact that my thinking wasn't okay, and I never handed everything, every single part of my life, over to my higher power. And when I kind of connected with that, things started to change. The only condition that I was allowed to stay in treatment for longer was that I worked for my stay there. I worked in the kitchen, every kind of luxury in treatment, like groups and big book and meditation. I wasn't allowed to be a part of. I was in service. I got to do meetings, step work, and service, and that was my life for, I think, about 5 weeks, and it changed me. I started to realize what things are actually about, and it's about making things about the newcomer, and I could never do that. I had quite a few buddies in treatment, and I screwed a lot of them up. I was never able to make it about the newcomer. I fought really badly with one of my buddies for months because I just couldn't be compassionate. I couldn't try help. I just wanted things my way. And yeah, I've had to realize that it's really not about me anymore. It's not about me in any way. I've spent the last 20 something years of my life making every single thing about me. Even if it wasn't about me, it was about me and how it affected me, and what about me and how am I going to do this, even if it had absolutely nothing to do with me. And yeah, today I am able to try my best to make it about others, even though I can still get incredibly stuck in self. But eventually I was allowed to go to the halfway house. I went to the halfway house again on a kind of a yellow card because I had been faulty still up until the time I had left treatment. And as much as a lot of things have changed, a lot of my growth has come from living in the real world. And in the halfway house, I've learned how to be responsible for myself. I've learned how to actually listen when people are there. It's not about fixing things all the time. Sometimes people just need things, or need people to listen to. And yeah, I've learned how to deal with normal people because I ran away from those kind of people in my life. I always just wanted to be around people that were as sick as me. And yeah, so I'm incredibly grateful for everything. I have friends that I know are there for me in a heartbeat whenever I do need them. And I've really connected with some people deeper than I have ever in my life. They're people that I knew in treatment that I still live with today that actually were a part of my active life, and I never knew. Because I never bothered to talk to anyone that wasn't feeding my addiction. But today I'm grateful to call a lot of the women in the fellowship my friend. And that for me, I guess, is one of the biggest things, is that I actually have female friends that I care about. And I get to see things that make me happy. I can see the good in things again, and I never could. I could never see the good in people. I never wanted to focus on the good in people. I've rediscovered kind of what I wanted for my life. I always just kind of thought what I wanted was money and power, and I guess today I realized all I really want is to be happy and eventually just have a family and live a simple life. I never wanted anything to be simple, and today I'm happy sleeping in a single bed, budgeting my food, eating very plainly and humbly, humbling myself enough that I can pray in a bathroom in front of a toilet when before I wouldn't even wash the dishes in treatment without gloves on. Um, yeah, I've humbled myself in a lot of ways, but for that I'm grateful because I was incredibly entitled, I was arrogant, um, I was just actually downright rude. I was very nasty. I was quite a piece of work, and I'm not proud of who I was, but I wouldn't change anything that has happened because it brought me to where I am today. And yeah, I guess for me, a big part of my journey as well, which I didn't even really touch on, was kind of growing a connection with a higher power because I had gotten myself to a place where I didn't believe in anything but myself and my own will, and that got me nowhere. And today I still have absolutely no idea what my higher power is, but I can't deny that it's there. Too much is coincidental for it to be coincidental anymore, and that shows as well. My first week in treatment, I almost died from trying to kill myself. I should have also ended up in a coma from the amount of medication I was on and having a heart murmur. But for some reason, with the grace of my higher power, I was able to stay present physically and not take myself out of this journey before the time's up. And yeah, I often get told it's quite a young age to be in recovery, but for me, I brought myself to my rock bottom quite fast, and in a way, I'm grateful for the fact that my parents let me do my own thing and never really told me what to do because I could have ridden this out for much longer if I chose to. But I guess when you decide you've had enough is when you've had enough. And I had had enough of the pain. I hadn't lost anything materialistically, but I had lost everything emotionally and spiritually and mentally. I had lost touch with what reality was, and today I am able to actually see things for what they are to the best of my ability. And I'm able to see a lot of God in things, which is a huge blessing for me because I couldn't see God in anything. But yeah, I'm now in recovery. Being a year in, I had major expectations of myself to be somewhere else. And my reality is that I am where I am, and that's it. For some reason, I tried to compare myself to other people's 1 years, and I still struggle a lot with being stuck in self. I struggle the most with expectations. A lot of my defects stem from my expectations of self, of others, of people, places, and things in general. And until I let go of those expectations, I can't accept things for being exactly the way they're supposed to be. And I've had to accept a lot in my recovery. I've also had to let go of a lot of things. I've had to turn down job offers. I've had to accept the fact that I have very different family relationships than a lot of people. I'm very distant from my family, but I make the effort that I can. And it's hard. It has been incredibly difficult, but I've also had to learn that they'll love me in the way that they're comfortable with. And for my dad and my stepmother, that's with things. And as much as I don't resonate with that, that means that they still care for me. I wouldn't be able to live in the halfway house or have a car or have a phone or anything really at this point in time if it weren't for them. All I really have today is because people have always tried to love me, even when I didn't want to be loved. And I've gotten given a lot of the love I needed. I often get handed my reality by my friends, by my sponsor especially. She's very quick to shut me down when I'm stuck in myself, and I'm so grateful for that because if I get stuck in myself, I can't focus on what the next right thing to do is. And today I sit with a lot of open doors that I never thought I would have had. A door is open for me to immigrate, a door open for me to have a career in something here as well. Doors are opening with my family where I'm in contact with my mother, who I refused to speak to for years. I would speak to her on a very surface level. I have been able to see my family, spend time with them, and be with them for big events. I have actually been able to form a relationship with my father for the first time in my life since I was 8. And I think that's what I'm most grateful for, because he's always been there. In terms of my family, it's what I'm most grateful for, because he's always been there in the background helping me. And at one point, my whole relationship with him was about either wanting stuff or telling him where I've screwed up. And today I can call him and tell him about what's going good in my life and ask him about what's going on in his life, and he actually appreciates speaking to me, whereas before I couldn't even have a 30-second conversation with him. But today I can sit down and have a lunch with him and talk with him. Yeah, I'm just overwhelmed with gratitude for so many things in my life. And yeah, things don't always go the way I want them to. I didn't want to immigrate so soon, but it's the best thing for me. It's where God is kind of leading me, not leaving me. And yeah, today I sit here being someone who is able to have genuine friendships, and not friendships just to use people. The fact that I'm friends with women and my life is about the women in the fellowship is amazing for me, because I had absolutely no connections with anyone beyond people I could gain things from. And today, all I really feel gratified by or grateful for is to be able to give, whether it's of my time, my service, or just an ear for people to speak to. But yeah, I think the kind of thing I've had to really realize is that I can do this, but I have to let go of a lot of other things. And I've had to let go of big parts of who I thought I was to discover who I really am supposed to be. And yeah, I'm quite excited to see where this all takes me, and I know that I can live this way of life if I choose to. Thank you for letting me share.